Okay.
Hello, and welcome to D Infinity Live, and I don't mean to boast, but let's raise a toast to the ghostly host who quotes the most Marcel Proust. Love is a reciprocal torture. Hello, and welcome again to D Infinity Live. I am your host, William T. Thrasher. With me, as always, is our co-host, Michael Jolly Varhola, and joining us tonight, a very, very special guest, the oddball from Oddmall, the creator of Lowlife, Gazoink, and too many other games for me to mention, Andy Hopp.
Hello, everybody.
And tonight, our topic is non-traditional settings. But before we get into that, Mike, what is going on with our website, d-infinity.net?
Well, there is always a ton of good material up there, good new material, and a lot of times we get a shift in the kinds of material. So for several months we had a lot of Chris Van Dielen's Labyrinth Lord and Mutant Future Monsters. And we've still got some up there, and he's still posting, but more sporadically. What we've had going up more recently are a lot of new feats and new defects, mostly by me and by you. So you've got a great one up there, Cold Reading, a new Pathfinder feat, which is the sort of feat that would be associated with a flim-flam man, a mentalist, etc. Somebody who does readings and presumes to know things about people that they might not really know. And I've got a couple of classics up there that people should take a look at. Protective Bulk, it's a good feat. Nose Breather, that's a fun one, especially for a spellcaster character. And Sense Tone for your canine or female characters. So check those out. And as usual, we've got about a dozen new things a week going up on the site. And I think people will be pleased with them.
Excellent. And what's going on with our co-publisher Skirmisher this week?
The main thing is that as of today, we are in production with the next Swords of Coast fantasy campaign setting sourcebook, and that is Lives of Coast. So that is basically a book of 100 plus detailed biographies of NPCs from the Coast setting, but they're every kind of character. There are wizards and assassins and bakers and just about everything you can think of. And these biographies are written so that really people could apply them to NPCs either in the Coast setting or another setting. Having detailed backgrounds on characters of many, many different ages and professions and levels of experience, I think is kind of cool. So we're in production with that. We hope to have that out very soon.
Yeah, actually, I owe you an illustration for a goblin rogue for that.
Well, fortunately, I believe your goblin rogue is named Trick Pick, which is way toward the end of the alphabet, and I'm starting with the beginning of the alphabet with the layouts. So yeah, we've still got a few more illustrations coming in and 6 more biographies. But all the biographies we're waiting on start with the letter I or I. So we're in production as of today with everything up to I. So, but it's moving right along.
Excellent. And Andy, as our special guest, I know you have a project that's going on right now.
I do have a project going on right now. Can I talk about it?
Oh, absolutely.
Sweet. Okay, guys, there's only like 15 hours left on the Kickstarter for Gazoink, the Great Gigging Gallivant. It's a super fun card game, and I think you'll really dig it. It's one I came up with at Gen Con a couple years ago, and Will, even though he doesn't know it, helped a little bit with it.
Well, thank
maybe
you.
you do know it. I don't know. Do you know that?
Well, actually, we talked about that at Origins.
Yeah.
You, me, and my partner in crime, Jason Aarons.
Right on. So the idea is, if I may expound a bit, I will. Okay, so you're a giggity gigger. I should probably explain what a giggity is first. These little critters that float around. Anytime they touch an organism, they copy a trait from that organism onto themselves. Like if one touched Mike, it might get his snazzy beard. If it touched Will, it might get his love of tacos. If it touched Mike again, it might get, his ability to shoot fireballs out of his belly button. Something like that. Or his crippling back acne. Or whatever, traits he has. Anyway, giggity giggers are these guys who can catch giggities, then waggle their zazz to take the traits from the giggities and copy them onto yourselves. And that's who you play in the game. It's a card game where you're trying to catch giggities and nab the best traits and become the most awesome giggity gigger ever. And you can check it out at www.gazoink.info, which is written right under my name in that lower third thing on the screen.
And we have also, if you're in our event page, we've also posted a link to Gazoink on our event page as well.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, so like I said, I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it. I'll get that out of the way. It's doing okay. It's made the first funding goal. It was doing better this morning, and then the funding went down for some reason. It usually goes up on the last day, but who knows? People have other concerns. So if anyone wants to check it out, please do. If you don't, we can still be friends.
Very, very cool. Well, ladies and gentlemen, tonight our topic is non-traditional settings, and as we've learned from a lot of our commenters, this can be a very contentious subject, if only because everyone has a different opinion on what a non-traditional setting means. So before we really get things rolling in the show, I'd like to go around the room and just have our hosts explain what non-traditional setting means to them. And for myself, a non-traditional setting means a setting that doesn't have its head up Tolkien's ass. It is a setting that you can't describe in one word. Like space opera, that's a traditional setting. If I say space opera, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Western, traditional setting, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It can't be a setting that we all know with one thing added. It can't be a setting that we all know with one thing taken out. It has to, for me, it has to be very, very divergent in a fundamental way. And it also can't be two conventional settings crammed together. Two conventional settings just make a new kind of conventional settings, no matter how different those two elements are. How about you, Mike? What do you consider an untraditional setting?
Well, you know, there can be extremes with this, Will. I think on the one hand, something like our Swords of Coast fantasy campaign setting is a non-traditional setting because we've taken it out of that archetypical Northern European setting. You know, so we've removed it from the wintry landscapes and people walking around in dirty furs and Tudor-style architecture. Just doing that, just setting it in the Eastern Mediterranean, just setting it in the Aegean, just having it be surrounded by our fantasy versions of Turkey and Greece and Egypt, that is a non-traditional setting on one level. It's not ultra non-traditional. It's going a few places away from that really tired traditional setting that you alluded to. But then on the other hand, you can go completely wacky. Skirmisher published a book some years back called Adventures in Wonderland, which puts into game terms things out of Lewis Carroll's books. And then, of course, you know, Andy will be able to talk a little bit about some of the things he's done that have even gone further afield. So, you know, I mean, like you said, it means different things to different people. I'm more of a fan of going 2 or 3 degrees off the norm rather than too far off the norm, because you go too far away from what's traditional or familiar, and it becomes increasingly hard for people to be able to get into it. They don't necessarily know what to do with it. But we can talk about more of that moving ahead.
And how about you, Andy? What do you consider a non-traditional setting? What makes a non-traditional setting for you?
Well, I mean, everything is based normally. You know, the traditional settings is, like you said, your head up Tolkien's ass, which is true. People are into that, though. You know, I mean, I have tons of people come to me and pitch me their ideas, and they're like, it's a totally new, non-traditional setting, and it ends up being exactly like Tolkien, except their elves have blue hair, or, right, you know, their dwarves are tall, but they're still elves and dwarves. So to me, I mean, there's a difference between unoriginal and non-traditional.
That's right.
You know? I mean, just because it's a traditional setting doesn't mean it's not original in some way. But I think it needs more than just saying, well, our elves have blue hair, or, you know, our elves have long pointy ears instead of short pointy ears, or whatever. I agree with what you said, Will, and what you said, Mike, that non-traditional can mean a lot of different things. Anywhere you go that's not that, you know, D&D fantasy world is pretty non-traditional. Yeah, so that's the end of that little phrase of my conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, but I take it. I still, you know, going outside of Tolkien, still take it further. If it's an established genre that one name lets you know what you're in for, I consider that pretty traditional.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, anytime you're doing what's been done before, you could say it's still traditional in some way if it's achieved some sort of popularity. You know, I mean, even the stuff that you would consider completely untraditional 20 years ago, which maybe like something like Call of Cthulhu or something, you know, that's completely traditional nowadays.
That's very true. I mean,
Yeah.
when it came out in the 80s, Call of Cthulhu was very different. One, that it was set in a mostly historically accurate version of the 1920s and 30s, but
Right.
with all sorts of gods and monsters, but gods and monsters that you couldn't just charge in and defeat. You know, I think that was the big thing that made Call of Cthulhu non-traditional. You know, winning in Call of Cthulhu is sacrificing yourself to postpone the extinction of the human race. It's not, you know, you would never slay Cthulhu.
Right.
But
Yeah.
now, you know, the Cthulhu mythos has reached enough of a level of saturation that there are many Cthulhu mythos-inspired games that are true to those themes.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, there's a difference between non-traditional settings and non-traditional gameplay. You know, like you said with Call of Cthulhu, Earth is still Earth, but it has the influence of the Elder Gods and everything in it. But the way you play the game is different from like D&D. Like I'm just kind of reiterating what you just said, and that it's not just hack and slash. You're not wandering through dungeons, you know, finding monsters and stealing their treasure. Instead, you're up against these things that you really don't have any hope of defeating. You have hope of maybe, you know, preventing them from defeating you, but that's not really the same thing.
Right.
Yeah.
It's very true. It's even with that it's a non-traditional victory condition. You know?
Right. Exactly.
Which is actually, I find often one of the most difficult things to communicate about Call of Cthulhu. People will ask me, well, how do you win? Well, what do you think winning is?
Right. Of course, that's always, to people who aren't familiar with a genre of gaming, conveying that sort of thing is always difficult. The only way to do it is to show them and have them play a game. I mean, the first time anybody ever played D&D, they didn't understand what winning meant. And then they played and they said, okay, now I get it.
Right. Yeah, I mean, when I came out with Low Life, if I can talk about Low Life for a sec.
I believe you.
Well, thank you. I don't want to hijack it, but Low Life is obviously a non-traditional setting, but it's based on traditional settings. For anyone who's not familiar, Low Life takes place gazillions of years in the future after humans are extinct. Every possible calamity or cataclysm that can happen to a planet has happened, although it's not post-apocalyptic setting in the traditional sense. Humans are extinct, like I said, and everyone has evolved from cockroaches and Twinkies and the various things that survived all the apocalypses. So it's a kind of tongue-in-cheek, humorous setting, but the attitude of the game is not that way, that it takes itself seriously, so it's very playable. But what makes it, I mean, there's a lot of things that make it non-traditional. Pretty much everything about it is non-traditional. But when that first started being advertised, people heard, oh, you can play as living poop, which is kind of true because there are these creatures called piles, which are the residue of contamination, which is a type of magic that deals with filth and trash and stuff like that.
It's not quite as simple as playing a piece of poop.
You're not just you're not Mr. Hanky or something, you know. So your biological waste of some sort, and that does include poo, but because, you know, it's a manner of filth. So
you're more like the trash heap from Fraggle Rock.
Kind of, yeah, right. But you can be all kinds of disgusting things mixed in there. And but when it was started being advertised, Shane Hensley mentioned, like, have you ever wanted to play poop or something? So people started talking about it on the message boards, like, this is the most immature thing ever, and it's so stupid, and how can they even publish this, and all that kind of stuff.
Well,
and then when it
never
finally,
seen the game.
Right, exactly. They just heard, all they heard was you can play as poo. Then when it came out, those people read it, and I got all these emails of apology and stuff telling me about how much fun it was and how it was playable and how it was different and exciting, and it was fun to play as poo. And, you know, the people that you'd think would be the most against it, against the whole puerile potty humor part, they're the ones who, when I run the game at cons, they always want to make, like, oh, my character casts a wall of diarrhea spell or something like that, which isn't even something I put in the game. But, you know, it's what they say. So I think people have a public face and then they have private desires. So, you know, just because something seems non-traditional and way out there doesn't mean it doesn't have an audience.
Right. Good point.
I think that's one of the I don't know, I guess for the lack of a better term, hurdle with a non-traditional setting is that there is a learning curve. You inevitably have to explain things to people to really get them to want to play.
Exactly.
And some people don't want to sit through that exposition.
That's true. I mean, people have limited amount of time in their lives. Especially a lot of old school gamers are raising kids and have full-time jobs and everything nowadays, and they don't necessarily want to take the time to have to read, basically a novel to learn the setting that they're playing in.
Right.
So I think that's part of the popularity of the traditional sword and sorcery fantasy and Tolkien-esque stuff, and then like the Star Wars style space operas and things like that, is that they are familiar. So yeah, I mean that's definitely a hurdle to overcome, is getting people in the door in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I think Mike, you do want to directly weigh in on this.
On what was the question? Last thing I weighed in on, what was a traditional fantasy campaign setting?
Well, it's been a very organic conversation. Although on the topic of like having to explain things, one thing that I love about non-traditional settings, and this is something that non-traditional settings I find are better at than just about any other kind of setting, is it's one of the few settings where you can really successfully do a fish out of water story. I've done that plenty of times when I've wanted to run like a very bizarre setting, to just tell my players, just make a modern day human being, just with as much or as little detail as you want. I will take care of the rest. And by the end of the first session, they've been brought into this weird world. That's the way I did Gamma World for the first time. I had everybody make astronauts, and I told them that it was going to be a campaign about exploring, being the first people to travel faster than light. But by the end of the first session, a horrible mishap with the ship caused them to crash into a post-apocalyptic Earth 300 years in the future. And it was a great way to get everybody in, because then they don't have to listen to me ramble on and on about what the setting is like. They don't have to track down a rule book and read it. They just get to organically learn about what the setting is, because they, just like their characters, are experiencing it for the first time.
I will make a counterpoint to what you've said about Tolkien, because I think it's only half fair, the characterization that you made about him being the basis of a traditional fantasy campaign setting. I don't even really think that's true. Because up until the Lord of the Rings movies came out, a lot of people had never been directly exposed to Tolkien. I would say it's more that people aren't reading, and they're being exposed to derivative things that are being derived from Tolkien, or if they are reading, they're not reading something substantive like him, they're reading Terry Brooks. They're reading those horrible Shannara stories. So the problem is not Tolkien. The problem is the hacks that have ripped off Tolkien and basically created an industry based on Tolkien spin-offs. So I don't think Tolkien's the problem at all. We've talked about recently Tolkien being essentially a high fantasy, an epic fantasy kind of setting, and most of us end up running a sword and sorcery type game. So we're really not deriving even our traditional games from Tolkien. I'm deriving my traditional games from Fritz Leiber and Robert E. Howard. So I don't think the problem's Tolkien. I think it's the unimaginative hacks that have ripped off Tolkien, and the posers who won't go ahead and do any original reading so that they really understand the genre for the games that they're playing. I think that's it. The customer needs to be more demanding, and the creators need to be a little more true. I think this is where we've gotten some of these stodgy settings that we're talking about breaking away from.
True. And actually, speaking of breaking away, before we get into questions and comments from our viewers, I'd just like to go around the room and have each of you just give an example of what you think is a good non-traditional setting.
I just had to chuckle at Mike's little White Castle product shot there. Are they paying you for that, Mike?
No, actually, this goes back to Gen Con 2003.
Oh, no.
We ended up picking up a Crave case at the White Castle across from the bus station in Indianapolis, and my friend Paul Knorr bought me this White Castle mug. So this is, in effect, my D&D coffee mug because I got it in Indianapolis 11 years ago at Gen Con. So yeah, that is the story behind this mug and why I'm usually drinking out of it on the show.
That's pretty awesome.
Thank you for asking. You're the first
the
one that's
logo is just facing straight out at the camera. Looks great. So, yeah. Before we get into what you just asked, Will, I just wanted to reply to what Mike had just said.
Oh, yes.
I agree with you about a lot of the themes and the storylines are much more Robert E. Howard and that sort of stuff with just sword and sorcery. But I think the character archetypes, the races especially with elves and dwarves and halflings, I mean, that to me, I mean, I know Tolkien was inspired by actual folklore and stuff with that stuff too. But when I think of like Dungeons and Dragons, that's what it is. It's elves and dwarves and halflings, and then the storylines, whether it's epic fantasy or sword and sorcery or dungeon crawling or whatever, that to me isn't so much based on the setting as it is the adventure itself. Because you can use any of those worlds.
That's right.
And have a grand sweeping campaign that changes the face of history, or you can have let's invade this tunnel.
It's the game that you want to run within that setting. So you're exactly right, Andy. The tone of the game and the setting are not necessarily the same thing at all. So yeah, that is well put. That's a good point.
Thank you.
Well,
hey, I'm sorry, Will. One other question. These little pictures at the bottom of the screen that have our faces on them. You know what I'm talking about? When I click on those, is that just my view, or am I changing everybody's view? When
that is just you.
Okay,
yeah,
cool.
Will is the only one that can change the view for the viewers, I believe.
Okay, cool. Just want to make sure I wasn't, harshing your mellow or anything.
I wield that power very wisely.
Okay.
No, it is sort of like the steering wheels that little kids have when they sit in the back of the car. That is you clicking on the pictures. Click away, Andy.
Hey, there's an idea for a non-traditional setting. Okay, cool. So back to your original question, if you please, sir.
Oh yes. Just if you're gonna give an example of what you think is a good non-traditional gaming setting.
You want to handle that first, Mike?
A good non-traditional setting. I'd say if you want to go a few degrees away from the norm, check out our own Swords of Coast fantasy campaign setting, because we've done some really interesting things. It has dwarves, it has elves, it has halflings. It's set up for people who play Dungeons and Dragons, but it is set in a completely different type of setting. So it's warmer and just I think more approachable than a lot of settings. So that is what we've tried to do with it. And then if you want to go to an extreme, one thing I'd really like to try. And I've done some conversions of creatures and other elements from the books. L. Frank Baum's Oz books. They're really great. There's a bunch of them. I think there's at least a dozen of them. I've probably read about half of them over the years. They are so much. They're kids' books on one level, but they're so much darker and grittier than you would imagine. They're openly misogynistic, which is not a good thing, but it's certainly surprising. It's a bad thing, but a surprising thing. But it's so much more of a complicated, dark, gritty world, Oz and the surrounding lands. And I really think that one day that would be something that could be made into a great fantasy campaign setting. Not one that turns it into steampunk like the Sci-Fi Channel has to do, and not one that dumbs it down and makes it into a kid's game like everyone who adapts Oz feels the need to do, but actually just a straight role-playing game set in the land of Oz as L. Frank Baum presented it. So I think that would be a terrific non-traditional game setting.
And that actually setting presents a really interesting challenge, because very early on in that series, death is banished from the land of Oz. And so it is impossible to die, and no one ages. Everyone is exactly the age they were when they entered Oz. And that presents some, it changes so many things. Like warfare is just people beating on each other until they're tired.
Right.
Because you can't really kill your opponent. You can wound them pretty badly, but they're always going to be there, and they're always going to rise again. And that just creates such an interesting angle. And
of course, in the context of a game, you could have ways around that. You could have a witch that had a spell that suspended that, because Oz is full of witches. There's all sorts of witches you've never heard of that turn up in the subsequent books. Or you could have a high Oz adventure where somebody was trying to prevent that from being overturned or trying to overturn it or whatever.
Yeah. Cool.
How about you, Andy? Do you have a good example of a non-traditional setting?
I've got a few. My absolute favorite setting ever, aside from Lowlife, of course, and Swords of Coast, of course, is Planescape from Second Edition D&D. I mean, that
a lot of people think
that. Yeah, I mean, Planescape was phenomenal. I mean, it's what made me decide to want to be a game designer and all that sort of stuff. And I mean, everything about it, from the layout of the books with the little blurbs and quotes in there, the art style, the way it was written, as if it was from the point of view someone living in that world rather than someone writing a game about it. That really turned me onto it, and it was just so creative and unique. And you know, there's a lot of those now. Like Dark Sun is another one that kind of took all those familiar fantasy archetypes and just kind of flipped them and said, well, you know, what can we do to? What's the opposite of an elf?
Yep.
You know, and that's what our elves will be. And what's the opposite of a halfling? And that's what will make our halflings be. And, you know, that to me was really awesome. And I love the novels that went along with it, too, because they were kind of adult in nature. They weren't dumbed down for, like, 13-year-olds. They were written for, you know, I mean, I guess I haven't read them in 20 years, so maybe they were, but in my memory, they're not. But another one, this isn't actually a setting. It's more of a game that just stuck out of my mind. When I went to Gen Con in, like, probably, like, 93 or 94, I don't remember, way back then, I played a D&D game that was part of the RPGA Society gaming, and it was called The Killing Jar. And in it, we all played insects in a normal human household, and our princess had been kidnapped, and she was a butterfly. And a kid had taken her in a net and put her in a jar, and he was suffocating her. And we had to, like, get through the house past, like a cat and a frog and, you know, normal things that are completely inconsequential to humans, but to bugs, you know, are huge threats. And it was just really neat adventure that, you know, 20 years later just sticks out of my mind anytime someone says non-traditional. So that'd be one of them. And, I mean, obviously, you can't really say, like, a human household is non-traditional. Well, unless it's a non-traditional family structure or something. But, yeah, right. But it's not what you think of as, like, a D&D campaign.
Right.
So,
it's a twist.
Yeah. And that was a blast. I love that. And I still remember it 20 years later. So, but there have been tons of them that they've done over the years, especially back when TSR was running things. They had, like, Dragon Mountain, and or wasn't there one where you actually played as dragons? I kind of remember that.
I didn't play that one. I'm not sure. Not as part of Dragonland.
Yeah, because back then they had, like Greyhawk and Forgotten Realms were kind of like the traditional fantasy realms.
Yeah,
and then you had
Forgotten Realms didn't even exist when I started.
Yeah, right. But then they tried a whole bunch of different things, like Dark Sun and Planescape. Then they had Birthright, where you played like the aristocracy or something, and you had these, like, world-changing powers. I never played that, but I read the books, and that always interested me.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's a lot of ways you can take a non-traditional setting, like just standard, you know, generic D&D setting, and just make little twists, aside from just changing the color of your elf's hair. There's a lot you can do to make it something different. No, I don't really either. But, you know, you'd be surprised how many people pitch ideas to me, and that's their big twist, is that their elves have a different color hair or something. So, but I should say to anyone watching this, if you have a game system that you've made, and the big reveal, the big twist is that your elves have a different color hair, that's great. If that makes you happy and it brings you, you know, joy, do it. But, you know, to me, it doesn't count as a completely awesome original idea.
Right.
Yep.
We see now I'm just imagining this campaign setting where it's all about elves, gnomes, and dwarves and whatnot who all own different salons and barbershops and parlors, and there's this secret war going on between all these different beautification establishments.
Actually,
that's actually a good idea.
4 of the characters in Lives of Coast are barbers. One is a master barber who used to be a gladiator, and 3 of her apprentices are barbers. You wrote all those up, Will.
Indeed, I did. Yes.
It sounds like the sort of thing Will would write. I've got some barbers in Lowlife that are in the books. There's one that's a barber / executioner. He uses his giant pair of scissors to do both jobs. So, you know, that's one of them.
Then you also have the guy with the gig wig.
Yeah, right on.
Now,
He's got a.
I'll throw out a plug for another setting. You know, one of our friends who's exhibited with us at Gen Con and who we go way back with, we've published a couple of his books, is game developer Lee Garvin. And he wrote our Noble Wild, which is our OGL and then Pathfinder version Animal Player's Handbook, where you can play an animal as a player character. Not an anthropomorphic animal, not a cartoon animal, but an actual animal. You could play a rat or a lion or an elephant or whatever as an advanceable player character. But he has his own campaign setting called Dravacor, and all of the races in it are new races. I don't even think he has normal humans in it. And I got a sneak peek at it. Geez, going back 10 years or so. So he has really gone above and beyond. So if somebody's interested in a really, really non-traditional setting from a guy who's a great developer, something that's actually, you know, available, like Low Life and like the Swords of Coast, I'd say check out Lee Garvin's Dravacor, which is completely different than anything else I've ever seen.
How do you spell that?
I believe it's Dravacor. I believe that is correct.
That sounds cool. I'm always a fan of things that don't have humans in them.
Yeah, I don't believe it has humans. And Lee Garvin is brilliant. For anyone who might not exactly recognize his name, he's the author of Tales from the Floating Vagabond.
Oh, okay.
So we've actually had him on the show before.
Yeah. So you know, that bears mentioning as something that it just came out within the last several months, I believe. His Dravacor setting.
Sounds very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. What I mean, like, there's certain things that people say you need in your campaign to anchor it. Like you were saying earlier, that, and I agree with you. The reason so many people are into the traditional swords and fantasy sort of thing is that it's easy and relatable, and that they're already familiar with it, so they don't have to go and learn something new.
Right.
And that's definitely true. What appeals to me, though, is something completely new. And that, I mean, I love just the idea that there's no humans. Like, I don't have humans in Low Life. They're extinct. And this Dravacor setting sounds really cool. And, I mean, if you do a sci-fi setting, say, like outer space, why do you need humans? If it's out in some other galaxy, you don't need them necessarily. But when we pitched the Low Life cartoon, the producers kept saying, well, you have to have humans in it or else no one's going to relate to it. So I finally gave in. I said, fine, you can have 2 humans that somehow got frozen in time or something. But the whole point of Low Life is that there aren't any humans. Like, the whole society is based on the misinterpreted archaeology, you know, of the extinct humans. So it doesn't make any sense to have humans. But they put them in there anyway, and, you know, there's no Low Life cartoon right now. I wonder how it would work if we didn't have humans. But, you know, because, I mean, if you look at it right now, there are a ton of cartoons on Cartoon Network and Nickelodeon and stuff that don't have any humans.
Yeah, that's right.
SpongeBob doesn't have human. I mean, it has like Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy and stuff, but they, you know,
but they're not human.
Right. And then you've got like Adventure Time has 1 human basically, and then there's other shows like The Amazing World of Gumball and stuff like that. There are no humans.
What's the one with the guys who work at the Park and Recreation Center?
Yeah, regular show.
Regular show. That, I mean, well, I guess some of them kind of. None of them are really normal humans in any sense.
No, I think it's good to have relatable characters. Like, just because a character's a raccoon or a blue jay
doesn't mean they're not relatable.
Right, because they act like humans. So
well,
just because they're not humans.
I live out in the middle of nowhere. Day to day, I see more raccoons than I see humans. Actually, raccoons are more relatable to me than normal Texans. So
yeah. So I take issue with anyone who says that you have to have humans in your world.
I agree with you.
You know.
Yeah, and I've actually done that back in high school. I ran a science fiction campaign where that was a key element of the game. There were no humans because it was sci-fi, but it took place in the present day in a sector of space that was just like a few light years away from Earth. Although that was in part because there was going to be an adventure that was going to bring the characters to Earth for a short time period. But anyway, this has been Cartoon Corner.
Yeah.
And now on to our questions from viewers. And first one comes to Heath, and he wants to know, What has been the most inventive, non-traditional character that you or a fellow gamer has ever come up with? And I'm going to give two answers. One, back in college, my really good friend BJ, we were doing Werewolf the Wild West, which is a fun kind of genre mashup setting, and BJ just in general just wasn't in the mood to play a werewolf. But still wanted to play in the game, and he's done something that I've never ever seen anyone do in a World of Darkness game. He made his character a completely normal human. He made it was the whole party was 4 badass werewolves and one 60-year-old prospector who owned a sickly old mule who was worth more than all the rest of his equipment put together. And this character was hilarious and fun and pulled the werewolves' butts out of the fire on a few occasions just by being a crazy old prospector. And then the other one would be Josh. Josh struck again and pitched to me a character concept for a game that I didn't run, in part because I didn't want to have to deal with this character concept and the hoops I would have to jump through to talk him out of it. His character concept was a mad scientist who, and keep in mind, this is technically allowable by the rules of the game. He was a mad scientist, one of a set of triplets. 2 other characters or 2 other players would be playing the other triplets, who were all, their souls were linked so they could combine their mad science with each other no matter where they were on the world, and they were also all descended from leprechauns. And this gave them this crazy teleportation ability. And the reason he wanted to play these characters is they were all part of an elaborate plan he had come up with to rob Fort Knox in the game. I will hand it to him. Yeah, I'd never heard of that character concept before. I would never think of that character concept. That's also a character concept I just don't want to have at my table. How about you, Mike?
Well, for the most part, the characters that I want to play or the characters that I'll let people play in my games tend not to be wacky. What I like this might sound boring in the context of what we're talking about, but I don't think it really is. I like characters to be traditional classes, traditional races in the context of the D20 game that I run, and to have people play them in interesting ways. I think a lot of times people are drawn to wacky things in the context of a D20 game, and it's really only because they're not particularly imaginative people. They're pseudo-imaginative because they've come up with some wacky kind of crap. But I really would prefer somebody take the most boring vanilla character concept they can come up with. Give me a boring character concept and then play it in an interesting way. Be a good player. Play it in a fun and interesting and compelling way. So that's really the direction I like to go. My villains and NPCs, a lot of them tend to be more wacky. So Will, you and I were talking recently about our Angus Danzig P-Slag Esquire, our obese anti-paladin who has completely immersed himself in the 7 deadly sins and become completely corrupted by them. Well, he's a monster. He's a bloated, horrible, armor-plated, steel-toothed monster. I mean, nobody would really want to play the guy seriously, but he's one of the most colorful characters that we've created. So when it comes to doing off-the-wall character concepts, it's for characters that are, in my games, that are insane or deranged or not quite right in some way.
Awesome.
How about you, Andy?
Well, I'm usually the game master when I play games, so it's more I make up all the NPCs and stuff, but some of my friends have made some just amazingly creative characters. My friend Gunnar back in college, he used to make the greatest characters. He played an entire campaign once as the magic sword of his brother. Cool. So his brother was also one of the players. So this was 20 years ago or so. I'm trying to remember it all. But yeah, Gunnar's character was actually Eric's character's sword. And he had all kinds of psionic abilities and stuff. That was a really fun one to play. Gunnar and Eric also played an Etten once when we had a magic evil campaign. And they had a giant sweatshirt, and they would both get in the sweatshirt together with both their heads sticking out of the hole and play as an Etten the whole time. And that's an idea for a non-traditional setting too. Is just taking a normal setting but playing the other side.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, playing monsters. And
Yeah.
maybe we can talk about that after this conversation because that
And
was
that can be
interesting.
fun.
Yeah, it was fun, but I'll talk about that in a bit. Some of the other players, my favorite character I remember playing in a non-traditional setting. I actually played this same character in 2 different, completely unrelated games. There's a game called Extreme Vengeance. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. It's a really good game by Ken Whitman and Tony Lee. Came out in the 90s. In it, you play not actual characters, but you're playing like an actor who takes the same character into different genres. So you could say like, well, my character is like, Schwarzenegger or something. So then you can play like Conan and you can play the Running Man and Total Recall and stuff, and you're playing as the character in the movie, but your special abilities are all based on like special effects. So like you get like slow motion and like bullet time and stuff like that. But anyway, we played a campaign once, or not a campaign, just a one-day thing where Ken was running it, and Larry Elmore and I were playing. Larry was like a renegade style biker dude, and that was really fun. Yeah, but I played a Harlem Globetrotter. This was so much fun. I was like this 7-foot tall black man with a huge afro and like the headband and the wristbands and stuff. And my weapon was a basketball that I just carried around with me everywhere. But I had all these trick shots and stuff, and that was just super fun. I just remember some adventure we had at a zoo with like mind-controlled gorillas or something. It sticks out. But I took that exact same character and played him in a changeling game, White Wolf, changeling, fairies and stuff, and that was super fun too. So, there's nothing completely different and original about a Harlem Globetrotter, but it's not what you picture in like a crime-fighting adventure scenario. So that was super fun. Yeah, there's so many weird and bizarre characters.
One thing that you come back to a number of times, Andy, is that to make something non-traditional, you really can just swap out a couple of elements. I'm not going to disagree with Will when he said you can't just swap out one thing, or disagree with you when you say, you can't just change the color of the hair, because I think you are both right about that. But you're right, just turning things around, shifting them a certain number of degrees, that can be enough to make people say, oh, wow, this was really neat. This was really, really different. Our co-host Brendan Cass ran a great scenario, and this is not a completely new or original thing. It was set in a temple that had sunken down to the bottom of the seabed. But if you're not doing that every session, if you're only doing that once every couple years, that getting seahorses and mounting up on them with saddles and going down and fighting underwater creatures and dealing with all the hazards of the underwater environment, that makes it a non-traditional venue. So yeah, I think sometimes just shaking up a couple of components is enough to make it really feel considerably different to people.
Sure. Yeah, I would consider underwater to be a non-traditional setting. We there was I don't want to give too much away because this product might eventually come out, but in a game I was working on, we came up with the world is flat and it's kind of disc shaped. It's not disc world, but what happened was there was an island that floated on one side and somehow it sank, but it went all the way through the other side. So now it's upside down underwater. So the cities that were on the top side of the island are now upside down and underwater. And that was a fun little place to explore because not only obviously is it underwater, but it's also upside down. So it takes a lot of imagination to figure out how to work with that and stuff, but it was a ton of fun. So you're right. You can take a traditional setting and make a sub-setting within the setting, like an upside down underwater world or anything like that. You could have that in, your most traditional Tolkien-esque fantasy world and still it's something completely different.
Yep.
Yeah. So, and also we should remember that the discussion we're having isn't about what's original and what's fun, it's about what's non-traditional. So just because something isn't non-traditional, that doesn't mean it's not cool.
That's right. Yeah, exactly so. Yep.
Right.
Yeah, and actually, speaking of which, comment from Daryl Mott Jr., friend of the show. You'll see him on our Comic Palooza live episode.
Hi, Daryl.
Yep. He says, what do you think of settings that were revolutionary at the time but are commonplace now? And the example he gives is Dark Sun being the archetypical desert punk fantasy. some things gain traction, and like we talked about with Call of Cthulhu. Call of Cthulhu was very non-traditional and very revolutionary when it came out, but now it has become its own genre of Cthulhu mythos gaming, and I think that's good. I think that's how the hobby develops and evolves. I think one of the reasons why you see Cthulhu mythos elements in so many non-mythos games is because Call of Cthulhu and that style of gaming got so much traction, and those concepts cross-pollinated between so many game masters, players, and game designers. So overall, I think that's a very positive thing. I just wish more cooler, crazier ideas were the ones gaining traction. I mean, sometimes it's just the ones that can withstand the test of time, like Call of Cthulhu, which has been around forever, or like Dark Sun, where it's not around now, but it is so well loved by so many people that you can see its influence show up in so many new settings.
I don't know that across the board it's a very positive thing. I wouldn't necessarily agree with you. It is the trend. It's the phenomena, what you described, but it isn't all good. Let me take Call of Cthulhu, for example. Back when I started playing Call of Cthulhu with Mac McLaughlin, who's the author, of course, of Cthulhu Live, the live action adaptation of it, which you've developed a lot of things for. Back when we started playing Call of Cthulhu in the early to mid 80s, everybody who was playing it had read Lovecraft or August Derleth. To understand the game, you needed to have actually read these things. So I know this makes me come off as an old fart. The whole idea that reading a book is a good thing, not just being a poser is a good thing. Really understanding the genre is a good thing. I don't think game developers like me or you or Andy should be the gatekeepers for people's knowledge, and we are. 90% of our clientele are not reading original source material. There are people who have played fantasy games their entire life who don't understand the fantasy genre at all in its fundamentals because they've played Wizards of the Coast games where no source material is ever attributed. There's no attributions given for the things, so you don't know where where the things that you think are wonderful in a D&D game. I've seen whole paragraphs lifted almost verbatim from the public domain works of authors dropped into Wizards things. People don't understand that if they were to go back and read the source material, they'd understand and appreciate the genre a lot more. So yeah, these things becoming more mainstream. I don't think it's just so great and wonderful and positive. I think it would be more great and wonderful and positive if people really tried to understand the genre a little bit more, and if the developers took it upon themselves to give full attribution for where they're getting their ideas.
I think that's definitely something they should do. But if I could disagree just a little bit with you.
Disagree? You don't have to agree.
Okay. Okay. So it just seems to me like there's different types of gamers. There's the hardcore super fans, which are the people you're talking about. Like if you're going to go out and argue about a game and argue about the setting and stuff, then you should have the source material to back that up. You should have read stuff. But if I just want to play a game, my friends are over and I'm like, hey, let's go, kill some orcs or whatever.
That's exactly right.
Then I shouldn't have to do homework. I shouldn't have to read a novel.
I'm not saying anyone should have to do anything.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that. I mean, I guess, yeah, I mean, I am an old fart, so this is part of the problem. But I mean, I remember the first time I was at Gen Con and I heard somebody say, Cthulhu's cool. And I thought, well, Cthulhu's not cool. Whatever Cthulhu is, he's this huge alien slime ball, kind of anthropomorphic squid. He's not cool. So I chatted this person up. Well, they've never read anything by Lovecraft. So I guess it's more that some people should just shut up. I think that's
okay. Yeah, I just think you got to definitely understand what you're playing in order to fuel your imagination and view what the author is imagining. But at the same time, the whole nature of a role-playing game is that it takes place in your imagination. So
and that's exactly right. And and the nature of any role-playing game, and this is to just sort of counterpoint my own point, is that people make of it what they want it to be. And I understand that and think that's what's really great about it. That you can transcend what the rules or the core of the genre is. So I mean, I would just say it's a double-edged thing. I wouldn't say it's completely wonderful across the board, but the phenomenon is double-edged. It's got its ups and its downs.
Although related to that, Mike, I would put it to you. I do completely agree. I think that most people who play Cthulhu-based and Cthulhu-inspired tabletop role-playing games, board games, card games, what have you, have not read the original source material. However, I will put it to you. I think more people are reading that source material now, in part because there are so many games out there. It's exposing the idea to more.
Yeah. That's a good point.
I never would have read Lovecraft if I hadn't have played Call of Cthulhu first.
That's a good point.
I wouldn't even known it existed.
That's so yeah. People are coming at it from a different direction. I mean, I guess what I would say is this: people are better human beings for having knowledge. Okay?
That's true.
People are better human beings for being well-read and knowledgeable. So if you're opting out of that in the things that you enjoy, then you're probably not opting in with the things that you don't enjoy. Probably if you really love Cthulhu, but you can't bother to read a story about Cthulhu, you're probably not a very interesting or well-rounded person. I guess that's what I would say.
Well, I mean, that may or may not be true. I don't know. I
Not
totally agree with you that reading is
theory.
important, and being well-rounded and knowledgeable is important. But again, it's a game. And
Right.
it's it depends on if you're the hardcore hobbyist, geek type, or if you're just
Sure.
like
Developers need to be held to a
if you're
different
one of those
standard.
weird people that enjoys playing Monopoly and you say, "Hey, Will, you want to play Monopoly?" Will's not going to go, "Well, I don't have my, college economics textbooks memorized or something, so I can't play Monopoly."
No. I'm just throwing some thoughts out there.
Right.
I'm
I'm just trying to pick a fight with you, so next time I see you in person, you're going to beat me up. And then I'll sue you, and it'll be fun. No, I'm just playing with you.
Andy,
yeah.
for the next con on the Cobb, that could be an event. You could set up a little boxing ring, get those oversized boxing gloves. You could have a game designer throwdown.
Now, for the record, I completely agree with Mike that knowledge is important and reading is important. Just not necessarily that you should have to do a ton of homework in order to play a game.
And I agree. I agree with you on that. I mean, you are correct. I'd say if you're a developer, then
definitely, yeah, you need to know what you're doing. Unless you're making it all up whole cloth, which is a different situation.
And even then, if you're making it up from whole cloth, you should be reading history and science books. If you're making it up from whole cloth, I've seen settings that are made up from whole cloth, and I can tell the ones that are created by people who are well-read and knowledgeable versus those who aren't.
Absolutely.
I remember years ago I looked over this fantasy map, and there was a river. There was a river that was connecting two seas. Hey, Lee. Well, rivers don't connect seas. If this person had ever read a geography book, they would have done that. Lee, I'd say you're looking great, but you look a little played out, brother. You all right?
Oh, I'm talking to you today from my sick bed, but every bed is a sick bed these days.
Is that a Dravacor shirt?
This is a Dravacor shirt.
I'm glad we brought up Dravacor today.
Yeah, I was trying to find a way to deal with the fact that my medication knocks me out and keeps me awake. So I suddenly saw someone mentioning Dravacor on Facebook and said, "Hey,
that was us."
Yeah, I'm gonna check it out. Mike just sent me the link.
Yeah, friend of the show, Lee Garvin.
Thank you. This was my first attempt at a T-shirt design. The back didn't fare so well.
Well, have you watched the show from the beginning tonight, Lee? Do you know what
I have not, but I saw some of the stuff that you were talking about. It's non-traditional settings.
That's right.
Which, I'm all about.
And I had said that I think that I got first look at Dravacor. I think you were over at my house in Virginia, and it must have been 2004 or thereabouts that I saw the Dravacor stuff for the first time. So you really put the effort into developing this, and it has been available for a couple months now, right?
Oh no, a couple years.
Oh, time flies. But I mean, it is available. Dravacor is available at this point.
Well, the main partially. The campaign setting, the campaign primer is a free download, and each of the race books is I think $4.99. And
that's right. I think you come out with that primer you and I had lunch a year ago, like exactly a year ago, and you had showed me that download at that time, I think.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have all of the race books done. Is the problem? There's just 3 of them, but they are the 3 more interesting races.
Yeah, right.
Sure. Yeah, the Akbar, the Machenk, and the Drega.
Mm-hmm. And it is. I mean, I didn't want to say too much and be wrong. Essentially, it has a lot of fantasy elements, but it's more what you call a sci-fi setting, right?
Not exactly. It's heavy metal.
Okay.
That,
See, it
the whole
transcends normal genre.
the whole point the whole point of this setting is I wanted a game that you can listen to Queensryche and get in the mood for.
Nice.
Queensryche, Metallica, Motorhead. These are the guys who are running through your head as you're hacking down your enemies.
Right. Okay. Good. I like that.
Because it's not all dun 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 dun. That's
right.
all good, but this is not Robin Hood.
Right.
And one of my taglines for it is, "You will not survive this."
And your other is what you just posted. Your other tagline. What kind of monster are you? Is that the other one?
Yeah. What kind of monster are you? Yeah. The whole point is the evil Emperor Malvish, and you can tell he's bad because he's got Mal in his name, just like my dog. And the evil Emperor Malvish has been around for at least 2,500 years, and this is a world where before him there were no sentient beings other than humans. This was a human world, just like Earth.
Right.
But Malvish and his subservient wizards have worked at developing new forms of life. One of the first intelligent forms they tried was, in Malvish's eyes, a failure. These were the Brush. The Brush are very orc-like in appearance and culture. You take all the profanity in all of the languages in the entire world, the Brush have more. The Brush is Brushak. Their language is the most profane in the entire world, and of course there are some things that they find profane other people wouldn't. The worst insult in the Brushak language is a man who pays for his own horse.
Right.
That's cool. Those cultural details could really make the difference.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
right. That's right.
Yeah,
Well,
I was working with Kira Woodmansee on some of the art for that. Giving her some of the art for the Nation books that are still to come. So no one has seen her art, unfortunately. But I gave her the general outlines of the Duva Plains horse people, and she invented the rest of them. Okay, you know what? They keep their camps like this, and the dogs are here, and the horses are here, and the axebeaks are here. And that made it gel even further. It was great.
Very cool. Well, Lee, you're joining us actually in the final minutes of the show, so we're about ready to do our closing thoughts. We're really glad you could jump on.
Yeah.
I'm sorry I didn't get in earlier. I mean, just look at all the stuff I had to pick up from the pharmacy today.
Oh, good Lord.
And that's in addition to...
We'll get John for our next medical show. We should have got John for our medical show a couple of weeks ago.
No.
We'll get John for the next one of those. So.
Well, because of this whole flu thing, I don't get to be a cyborg yet.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah,
Are you going to be going? What's up with that?
I was actually scheduled to have a defibrillator installed in my chest next week. But I asked, and they will not let me run leads down to my fingertips so I can zap people.
Oh.
Is this the dark future in which we are imprisoned? Well, ladies and gentlemen, on that peculiar note, we're wrapping up tonight's discussion on non-traditional settings. But before we sign off, I did want to go around the room and get everybody's final thoughts on non-traditional settings. And I guess I'll go ahead and open it up. just get creative. Let your imagination run completely wild. Or failing that, find something, a book, a TV show that you've never seen a game like that, and then adapt it for your tabletop. I mean, sometimes that's just the best thing you can do. Sometimes what makes a setting non-traditional is because it's something no one's thought to adapt yet, and you can get a lot of mileage out of that. Michael, what are your final thoughts?
Well, my two final thoughts would be read, kids. Open that book, pick it up, read it. And then if you're an adult, then shame on you. Also start reading. And then keep an eye out for Lives of Coast, which Will, you've contributed to. I've contributed to. Clint Staples and Brendan Cass and Richard Bosley and Heath Farndon. We've just had an elite team contributing to this book. As I mentioned before, it's in production as of today and will be out in a week or two, and people should check that out. The latest book in the Swords of Coast fantasy campaign setting, Lives of Coast.
Sweet.
And Lee, what are your final thoughts?
I'm just sorry I didn't get to talk about the setting my brother and I just came up with the other day, because he saw some pictures and came up with the word thunderpunk. And then I started working with him, and it's basically, imagine a world where the royal families and CEOs and presidents of the world are replaced with biker gangs.
Well, we will do a show of games with the word punk in them, and we'll get you on for that one. How about that?
Excellent. All right, and Andy, as our special guest for the evening, we'll go ahead and give you the final last words.
The final last words. All right. Eat your veggies. Don't do drugs. Stay in school. Clean living.
But drugs are all?
I don't know. Okay. Oh, you mean about non-traditional settings? Okay. Yeah, I mean, do what inspires you. You know, I mean, your setting doesn't have to be non-traditional in the traditional sense. It can just be elves with blue hair if that's what you're into. But if you want something, if your goal is I want to do something no one's ever done before, then I don't think it's enough to just say let's take a traditional setting and do something different with it. If you want to do something different, do something different. If that's what you want to do. So, do what you want to do, I guess is what I'm saying. Cool. Words of wisdom there. That was profound. Do what you want to do.
No, but that's good. I mean,
it depends on if your goal is I want to do something different just to do something different. Then make it as different as you can. And if it ends up being too weird or too out there that it's not playable or relatable, then tone it down from there. Don't start out and say, okay, I've got, Middle Earth, but, my orcs are a foot taller or something like that. Go for it. Make it the weirdest thing you can imagine, and then edit yourself down. Yep.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that has been the Infinity Live non-traditional settings. For myself, William T. Thrasher, for the ever jolly Michael Varhola, for special surprise guest Lee Garvin, and from special announced guest Andy Hopp, creator of Low Life and Gazoink. This has been the Infinity Live, and we will see you all next week.